Welcome everyone. I'm Angelo Robles. We're doing something a little different today. AI, sovereign risk, and billionaire playbooks. I'm very honored where we're reversing the roles today. I'm being interviewed by David Bain, founder and publisher of Family Capital, as he interviews me, Angelo Robles. So on that note, without further ado, I am handing the reins and control to David Bain. David, it's all yours.
Oh, thanks very much, Angelo. Um, Angelo Robles is a global authority on family offices, renowned for his bold vision and forward-thinking approach. As a family office strategist and futurist, Angelo's has spent over 20 years guiding elite family offices through the complexities of wealth management, governance, and legacy building in an era of AI transformation, geopolitical risk, and economic upheavals. His work focuses on breaking outdated models and building future forward family offices that are adaptive, resilient, and designed to thrive for generations. So let's just start with a little bit of the state of the family office industry, Angelo, if we could. You've been associated with the community for decades. How do you view the current state of the family office industry?
Well, thank you, David. I'm in the hot seat and something I'm not as normally used to because I'm the one on my at family office doing the interviews. But one, thank you. I've been a big advocate and fan of the incredible work that you, the team, Mike, and everyone does at the organization. So thank you. Yes, I guess you're saying in a very nice way that I may be a little bit old, but that's okay. Yes, I have been in the community a long time, and I've been very blessed and very, very fortunate. There are incredible people that both service in the community as well as incredible families, and in my world, specifically single family offices. And I've been so fortunate to grow up, to learn, to make mistakes, and hopefully impart some level of guidance. So 2/3 of family offices, it's believed, have been created since the turn of the century 2000. And although I don't know if I quite believe this, I heard 2/3 of those really in the last 6 years since 2019. So there's a lot of new quote unquote family offices. And now the world is in turmoil. We have wars going on. We have various political regimes that are adapting and changing as we go along. And in the last couple of years, we have the rise of AI. So the industry is changing radically. And most professionals and most family offices, if I could be rather blunt and honest, they're not adapting or not adapting quick enough. They're in for a rude awakening. And this is going to be a very, very interesting time. A little bit from the perspective of servicing the community and having traveled the world, Europe relatively recently, and having met a lot of people and know a lot of people broadly in the community, there are some things that are disappointing. Most organizations that service the community from a community builder perspective are event-centric organizations. Their monetary model is often built around sponsorship, and I understand you have to make a living. But nonetheless, I think the quality of content that is unique and cutting edge is lacking. It's very vanilla, very boring, to be honest with you. It's the same old things being talked about over and over, and a lot of the same people, honestly, being rolled out without them coming up with newer, original thoughts and adapting to the times. Yes, there are some things that are evergreen, and a new audience, I guess, has to hear that. But for the most part, honestly, I'm a little disappointed in most of what I see within the family office community. I think it could be so much more and so much better. And for the reasons that I described when I opened up in the question, I think a lot of us, or a lot of them, are going to be in for a rude awakening. It's not always what you don't see that destroys you. The things that I'm talking about are things that you see, and those are the ones that you see, but you fail to act on.
Sure, sure. Um, is the traditional family office model still relevant, or is it in need of reinvention? What's your view on that, Angelo?
Yeah, it's definitely in need of reinvention. Most family offices are built for a world that is already gone. Let that sink in. But the top 1% of family offices, I believe they're adapting. You need to build, innovate, and dominate in a world that is changing very rapidly. Elon Musk and others have said the next 10 years are going to be like 100 years condensed. So it's moving at breathtaking speed. What normally might have took half a year, or 3 years, imagine multiplying that by 10. And that really is the speed about how things are adapting, I guess, is one thing you could say. So I'll say this in concluding my answer to that. Family offices were originally designed for capital preservation, long-term growth, and multi-generational continuity in a relatively stable, it's the key word, relatively stable economic and political landscape. That world no longer exists.
Great, Angelo. So where do you think family offices are failing? How are they failing to adapt? Give us some views on that.
I mean, honestly, there's a couple of stories I tell. One of them is called the Detroit Paradox, and I give several examples, but people do tend to enjoy stories, and we'll probably get to that relatively shortly. I think a big problem is effectively they're stuck in a slow-moving, bureaucratic, quote unquote, system that has been created year after year in a family office. There's issues with principal and agent, lack of connection and lack of continuity, a lack of alignment of interest is maybe a better way to put it. There's lots of issues with what I call the gatekeeper problem in a family office. When the gatekeeper can no longer be of value to those they serve, their understanding and their approach to the world is they gatekeep that world, quote unquote, from the principal. Therefore, the principals and the family get sometimes used to a family office that is comfortable, but not necessarily optimal in today's world. They arguably get too much. I'm going to shock everyone here. You need to have governance. Governance is how you make decisions. You should absolutely have mission and vision statements, of course, a constitution, a huge advocate, and shame on you if you don't. You're not going to be forward thinking in today's world, understanding how to process information and make decisions. But could you have too much of it? When you have too much of that, when you have the gatekeeping of the family office, a principal and agent problem, as I described, coupled with not understanding the true global picture, understanding a geopolitical landscape, global economics or macroeconomics more applicably, coupled with the incredible fast rise of AI, which is a lot of the things that I've been talking about and active in, you have everything set up for fragility in the family, not anti-fragility. What you want to have is anti-fragility. You want the ability to have the capacity and the capability. That's what you want to develop within the family. We could dive into that further. People like Christian Stewart, Matt Wesley, Jay Hughes have written about capacity and capability and are, beautiful in terms of their genius in terms of it. And I learned so much from them. So I do think the industry is being rocked. I do think it's going to look radically different within a few short years. Really, it's happening right now. But imagine by 2030, imagine as AGI and superintelligence inevitably come into play within the next 5 to 10 years. What is going to be the impact? And those are all things that, as we progress in our discussion, we'll get a little more into, but I do look forward to it.
Brilliant, Angelo. What you talked about the Detroit paradox. Can you maybe give us some thinking on that? What exactly does it mean, and why does it matter for family offices?
Yeah. I mean, I generally find that people, if I'm speaking at a program or getting invited to speak, as opposed to just giving statistics and all that, they kind of like things to come to life within a little bit of a story, of a quote unquote a paradox or something that I could weave in. So I think about it, what I thought of when I thought about what I call the Detroit paradox, which is a collective of all the things happening, especially in AI, and the impact that's going to have on the industry and on family offices. To me, and my focus has always been more and more on single family offices. So exactly what is it? Well, it implies the US auto industry was absolutely king and totally dominant. And then the 1960s come along, and the Japanese auto manufacturers are looking at the US is getting bloated, meeting the manufacturers of autos, the usual suspects that I could name. They're getting high on the hog, as we say. They're getting comfortable, like an old pair of shoes. They're building big cars. They're inefficient in their operations. And henceforth, Detroit, I know because I spoke to people, they saw the Japanese auto manufacturers, quote unquote, coming. They knew it was going to be an issue, but they were only concerned about their short term and about them. Right now, at the moment, maybe 6 months, a year from now, it'll be someone else's problem in 5 or 10 years. I won't be here. I'm cashed out. I got my pension. Henceforth, what happens? Moving forward a little bit to the early 70s and 74, the oil embargo, and henceforth, big cars, gas guzzlers, inefficiencies are no longer what's in vogue. And really, that impacted the US auto industry, kind of, I could potentially argue, to this day. Now, we could bring Tesla into the mix, and that changes some dynamics. So what's the big issue here? Detroit saw in the 1960s the Japanese auto manufacturers coming. By the 80s, the Japanese auto manufacturers crushed them. Detroit went from being the capital city, and in the 1950s, I believe, per capita, the wealthiest city in the United States, and a lot of people don't know that, to basically a city on the brink of bankruptcy and decay. And I believe family offices are now making that same mistake, as I would say. AI isn't just coming, it's here. When you see it, when it's so obvious, when the tsunami is at your doorstep, it likely is too late. You have a chance now, because it's not quite what it needs to be for family offices to dominate in wealth, and a lot of the other things we'll inevitably get into, but we are getting closer and closer. It's already running or active in a fair number of hedge funds. It's optimizing market decisions. It's making organizations faster and better. So not just faster and more inefficient and not as good, faster and better than, honestly, human only. So I'm not saying in coordination, human only teams. So family offices, for the most part, are ignoring it, but they know it's like, oh, I know Angelo talks about it. I know it's out there, but like they just don't want to confront it. So I believe moving forward, not only do family offices have to be more knowledgeable, from geopolitical issues to addressing liquidity and sovereign risk to investing in a new world order. I mean, I know I'm going a little hardcore on this, and I may get into this later. We have a US president, a newly elected US president, that was a multi-billionaire. And in a two-day period right before being inaugurated, basically made tens of billions of dollars, way more net worth than he did in real estate over 50 years in effectively a meme coin. Now, I could say some good things about that and some things that may not be as positive. But here's what I will say, and you have to agree in that analogy right there, and tying in my Detroit paradox, the world is absolutely changing. If you're not adapting to this, you will be like the frog in slowly boiling water. You won't really feel it at the moment, but let time go by and you'll fade away. Most families have a hard time sustaining through the generations anyway. That is going to be more and more accelerated as we move forward.
Brilliant, Angelo. You've also talked about what if scenarios for family offices and how they can deal with, crises. Can you give us examples of some of these what if scenarios and how family offices can possibly deal with them? I think you mentioned, for instance, power grid failures, financial networks shutting down, communication systems collapsing, infrastructure is in lockdown. Give us how maybe talk about these scenarios and how they relate to family offices and what they can do to prepare for those potential scenarios.
It could take a family decades, sometimes a century or more, in terms of building great wealth. And a lot of times they don't realize, sure, there could be slow decay, and that's probably the more common, but there could be sometimes one day or over even a week where things could go very wrong. And they're ill prepared in terms of crisis. So working as a consultant with single family offices as well, I like to run through kind of tabletop and what if scenarios for family offices that they're not thinking about. It's not to necessarily expose some of the weaknesses that are inherent in, unfortunately, too many family offices. It simply is to make them better and be aware of these things. So people do tend to relate sometimes to real life scenarios and stories, a little bit like I mentioned with my Detroit paradox and not seeing AI coming and how the world is changing. So I'll maybe give one what if. I don't want to bore the audience and go on and on and on. I'll talk about April 6th of 2024. Now, we're doing this in early 2025. That was under 1 year ago. Under 1 year ago. So I'm standing, I was not in Wyoming at the moment. I was in Connecticut. I have a home in the suburbs. So what, about 90 miles outside of New York City, and my ground rocked. There was an earthquake. We're not used to that. I'm not in California. So I thought, even really at the moment, how's my son doing in college? Let me reach out. How's the family? I thought about a little structural damage. I mean, I've never really felt something like that here. And normally, once you get one, there could be a cascading effect that could happen. So, and then I learned a little bit about New York. So for 30 minutes, airline shut down, access via sea effectively shut down. I don't know if auto travel, they limited bridge access, but imagine it was worse than it was, and there was a cascading effect. What would happen? Being stuck in a big city like New York, or really any place, but just imagine, because it was in the greater New York area. Imagine, God forbid, a bridge went down and there was no access. Imagine power and electricity, which has happened before in various things in New York, and we have an aging electrical grid and a lot of problems with our infrastructure in this country and in many countries that are kind of falling behind. And we may get into deficits and challenges and things like that that relate to kind of rebuilding, quote unquote, the country. So I like, and I think, as you know, because I think I've written something before for your periodical, I've done consulting work for among the wealthiest families literally in the world on addressing sovereign risk and disaster preparedness. It's one of my passions and a little bit unique, I guess you could say, in terms of the work I do. By the way, water, that drinkable water, because you could go without food commonly for weeks, arguably months, but you cannot go without water, the moisture of water, for more than probably 2.5 or 3 days. So always, what's your plan? How are you, your family, and your family office going to communicate? Suppose electricity went out. Well, you're probably not going to get your Bitcoin to work now. How are you going to go to an ATM? Now, we could talk about bank failures and things like that, but just suppose they're just closed. It's an emergency. There's no electricity. You have no access to cash. You have arguably limited access to water. There's powder kegs of challenges going on in big cities now. I think we all have to agree with that. How much would it take for that to really flip? Is it an hour, 6 hours, a day, or 2 days? How are you going to protect yourself? How are you going to communicate with family? How are you going to have an exit plan in and out? So families need to think about, if something were to happen, what's our systems? What's our standing operating procedures? Do we have a sat phone? How could we communicate if things were to go down? Is there a game plan that we're following, effectively what I call a crisis response? Who's making decisions and what's the chain of command? I mentioned systems, processes, standard operating procedures, access to water, supply chains, safety of the family. How are you going to relocate? What are the options? Do you have a place outside of New York City, in the example that I gave, that is maybe 2 or 3 hours removed? How are you going to secure it? How are you going to access it? So these are all important subjects. And families know that we're in very scary times right now. There's multiple wars going on. The world has never been more dangerous when you factor in the power of nuclear and a lot of the things that are happening out there. Sure, some of you may go back hundreds of years, but the world per se, at the blink of an eye, wasn't at risk. Not to change the topic, but just to bring things to people. In New York, in early December, New York again, I hate to pick on you, I was in Florida, and I heard the news that someone shot the CEO of United Healthcare. Like, there's a backlash now to kind of the rich and the super rich. And I never thought I would have seen where a couple of days later, the alleged suspect, Luigi Mangione, was almost made to be a hero by a certain percentage of the population. So this goes into, and I could get really deep, which we won't today, into how society could topple and the risk to family offices. I could go back to the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, 1620 English Reformation, Nazi Germany, and a lot of things where the rich, depending on societal and issues with the haves and have-nots and a lack of the middle class, creates a problem. And I'll tell you this one thing, when things go to hell in a handbasket and there's way more of the have-nots than the haves don't end up 99% of the time or 99% of them in a good spot. I could get very graphic. You don't want to hear that, but their assets could be taken from them and far worse. So these things are uncomfortable, but they need to be thought out. And more society is at a backlash relative to the super rich.
What about the oversights you see family offices? The biggest oversights you see family offices in terms of disaster planning. I mean, what can they do sort of immediately to improve maybe some of those oversights when it comes to disaster planning?
Well, they have no disaster plan. You're making the assumption that they have a plan and that they maybe did a test run of it. The vast majority, probably 97, 98% have not. And again, it goes back to some of the things I said, and it goes back a little bit to family and being anti-fragile, capacity and capability of the family, and the value that they're bringing to society. I could get into an onshore and offshore plan, areas around setting up proper trust and structures, a family foundation, the value of influence, and of giving back and doing good relative from a societal perspective. But some of the things I spoke about when I gave my scenario that imagine if April 6th of 2024 was worse than it was, we're fortunate. And that's something that, by the way, whether you're worth 100 billion or nothing, you have no control over that. That's a natural disaster. I could talk about solar flares and other bad things, Yellowstone Park blowing up and things that could go wrong. At the end of the day, there may be limitations in terms of what you could do. I did state earlier the value of water. I did state earlier, that would go back to Maslow's hierarchy, I guess you could say as well, with shelter, food, and water, if you want to be a little more specific. But water probably is, of course, the most immediate. Areas pertaining to what kind of maneuverability are you going to have? And yes, you are going to be more vulnerable. I just can't put it any other way. You are going to be more vulnerable in a city. That's just a reality of how it is. So I would look at decision paralysis, over-reliance on governments and institutions to kind of save you. No real-world testing. You should do the tabletop type exercises that I noted. I could make the argument, and we're going to get more into AI shortly, but although it can't, I guess, capabilities we'll have predicting such natural quote unquote disasters, it could help in predictive quote unquote risk modeling. Now, liquidity risk, I think, is very, very important. We may get to a variation of that shortly. And I would remind the audience, the money you have in a custodial account, in a bank account, one, it may be as good as the electricity, and the openness of banks and institutions, it also is a single point of failure. Suppose you're deemed to be a combatant of the state. Oh, that never happens in a Western society. Well, yeah, it does. Look at the truck drivers in Canada. It wasn't quite as bad as it could have been, and the threats that were made, but a lot of things could go very, very wrong. I could talk about cash on hand, literally cash on hand, about what areas with a state in the US or a country around the world we'll get to. And I'll name some names and countries that may be more intriguing from a global diversity perspective. I could talk more about Bitcoin, about Monero, which is, let's go with the words, less traceable by entities or governments than Bitcoin. So these are all things that I actually don't think are that complicated, but they do need to be thought through. And the reality is, You have all that wealth, decades after decades of building up that needs to be protected. And there's a level of concern that it's gotten long in the tooth and that you're not thinking of the things that could go wrong, David.
Sure. Great, Angelo. How do you think family offices should be evolving to respond to AI, geopolitical risks, and macroeconomic shifts? Maybe you could give us some thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, that's a lot there. So maybe we'll kind of go through some of it, of course. So again, they're acting as if we're living in a world that doesn't exist. Most family offices are built on a playbook, a platform that effectively is pre-AI, and that's understandable since AI is really, although technically has been around since the 50s, really it's the last 2 years. And again, I go back to, you look at people like the current CEO of Google saying it's going to be as impactful as fire and electricity. You hear Elon Musk talk, you hear Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, you hear about the growth, something that's going 10x goes from 1 to 10, then 10 to 100, then 10 to 1,000. What, in like the end of 3 years? Look how much growth and capability is happening there. So this is happening so quick to often family offices that are too bureaucratic and too slow, and honestly, just may not have the internal talent and resources, to some degree, mindset. I think part of it could be taught, but I don't know if they want to learn. So AI is reshaping the world of wealth management, legal accounting, servicing, investment strategy, and definitely family offices. And, traditional investment strategies by families built on more quarterly reporting and human-led analysis is honestly moving too slow to also take advantage of some of the more unique opportunities, I guess you could say, that are kind of happening at the moment. So if I had to go maybe a little bit deeper into some of those subjects, we're entering into a new economic era from more of the macro perspective that I noted: interest rates, deglobalization, hard asset allocations. I mean, these are all things that family offices are going through. The tech-driven liquidity boom of the past 20 years for families and family offices, it needs to be, I would say, maybe the word is more adaptive in a new world. The traditional 60-40 portfolio is, a Wall Street, in my opinion, fabrication. And families need to think about a lot of different things, including AI integration, geopolitical resilience, as you noted, and investment strategy shift. Here's one note that I'll make when it comes to AI. And one, you need to, and you absolutely could leverage AI for investments, for deal flow, for risk management, and operational efficiency. I invest in public and private markets in AI, and they've been valuable for me. I'm being tactical in what I do, but I look at it far beyond investing. I look at it as a playbook of my knowledge, my future, the future of my family, mitigating risk, and for operational efficiencies in my quote unquote, my family office. We're going to be heading to a world, David, and it's right around the corner. And I know a lot of executives don't want to hear this. It's a reality where deca billionaires are going to have under 5-person teams. We're not quite there yet, but that's not 20 years from now. It might be a year from now, it might be 18 months, maybe 2 years. Yes, there'll be a need for human interaction, but do you need to have more than one or two? We're all going to hear that AI is going to augment us as humans, and that's true. And if we're not using it, we're not going to be as effective. But how about the world in 3 to 5 years where simply it may be flat out better? So the ability of identifying problems, the ability of solving problems, and identifying exponential opportunities, and having the emotional intelligence and the communication skills to interact with the principal and the family. When I think of an incredible attorney, which is so valuable to a family, I don't necessarily purely think of their technical capability. That's going to be more and more of a commodity moving forward. I think of them having the incredible ability to, let's go with the word, to solve problems. So here's one thing that I am going to say on AI. You do understand that when we use things like ChatGPT, Anthropic, wonderful programs, I mean, I use them too, that I'm training that program and sharing it with the world and my competitors because I'm making those programs better. So a lot of people and a lot of families are so behind on tech and their tech stack anyway to get operational effectiveness and efficiencies in their family office. It's woeful. Most family offices are so bad and so far behind with that. And then you add in the advent of AI and the things that we're talking about here, and it's egregious. But going back to the issue of AI, I've been talking about you need to take control and own, don't rent. So you could utilize Meta's Llama model, which is open source and foundational, bring it in internally, not share it with your competitors in the world in terms of certain inputs that you have in it. Now, might you need to have a machine learning specialist and some resources? Sure. We could talk about insourcing and outsourcing that and maybe other talent as well. Although I had someone reach out to me a couple of days ago that said, Angelo, you give me and two other talented people a 3-day weekend with enough caffeine and Skittles, and you'll be shocked about what we could create as technologists, even for family offices. So I'm going to look and I work with families about not just understanding tech, not just AI, and not just the pure investment play of it, although that's important. I also talk about risk management, operational efficiencies, impact on governance, decision-making, et cetera, and bringing it more internal, how to have my own internal edge by owning it, not renting it, and structuring that on certain models like what I described. Yeah, it's not cheap, but it's not wickedly expensive, partially depending on what the goals are. So I think a lot of the tech companies that so-called service the family office world now, they're not built on an AI platform. And they're not in a rush to change because they have a profitable model without changing, without rocking the boat, without opening the eyes of their family office clients. And family offices are often too slow to realize that, I wouldn't say they're being taken advantage of, but there's a lot of conflicts of interest in the community. And again, I don't know if you want to dive really, really deeply into that. It's probably going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people that might even be watching. What I'm saying is no one cares about you like you. If you're a family, no one cares about your money like you can. The buck stops with you. You're responsible for the quality of the people you hire. Nothing is more important in a family office for now than hiring brilliantly. And most family offices know absolutely do not do that. They hire for comfort and the perception of safety. The world is going to flip them upside down in the next couple of years. Things are changing rapidly. Families need to be responsible. The accountability stops with them. They have to have a family office that can move forward in a new era that understands risks that are happening around the world. They need to take control of AI, utilize it, and build it more internally in the family, David.
Sure. It's interesting, Angelo. How are sort of AI-driven family offices outpacing the traditional ones?
Well, there's certainly, unfortunately, not a lot of them. I can't say that I know all of them. And sometimes families that are doing incredible, they're a little bit reluctant in terms of wanting to share that. So, kind of are family offices asleep at the wheel, or are they not optimizing perhaps the way that they could, quote unquote, their family office? And will AI powered family offices outperform, depending on how you consider and how you quantify, quote unquote, performance? And those are all other important things in the family office as well. So there's a variety of different factors. Also, we didn't even bring up from an AI perspective. How about deep fakes? How about all these things where your team, and others, it's already tricking some big banks and others. So it's not just you as a family office. If you have greater acknowledgement and utilization of AI and bring certain things internal, you'll be better on cyber risk than others that don't. And that would be deep fakes, that would be frauds, that would be cyber attacks. So family offices may need, I could argue, a dedicated AI security and digital risk management strategies. I didn't necessarily say teams. So they're going to be more efficient, David. And when I talk to families, and again, these are uncomfortable conversations with some of the audience here, they want to be better, they want to be faster. And to think that speed doesn't matter, it's just foolish. better, faster, and they would use the word more efficient. I'm going to use the word leaner. And let's be blunt. What does that word leaner mean? It means I could do more with less. So currently, if I have 20 employees and I could potentially have 7, do I have less problems with managing people, with inter-office challenges on a variety of subjects, some that were a PG show, so we can't talk about, that happen in quote unquote offices? And humans are frail. We make mistakes. We don't last forever. So the opportunity of combining the right talent with technologies and AI is just simply going to be a leaner, faster, and better family office moving forward. Am I a pinch early? Maybe. But by a pinch early, I'm not meaning 5 or 10 years. I'm meaning 6 months, a year, 18 months. Like I said about the tsunami earlier, like I said about the Detroit paradox, you don't want to wait until it's at your doorstep. You want to address it now, because then it may be too late.
Great. Can we move on to sort of investing and asset allocation, Angelo? Um, you are an early investor in Bitcoin and crypto. What major themes are you allocating towards now?
Yes, I was early in Bitcoin. Many in the family office would remember, even on my platform at Family Office on YouTube, I probably overdid it and spent too much time broadly on crypto and Web3. And yes, I might have got fortunate on Bitcoin, Solana, and some others, but there were definitely others where I bombed at. I'm imperfect. So what makes me maybe a little bit unique for people, given some exits and some significant investments that I've had, is I am an allocator. I technically have a family office structure in Wyoming, and theoretically, I guess you could say a holding company too. Now, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself anywhere near a true quote unquote single family office, and that could be another discussion for a different time. In today's world, with selective outsourcing and AI, and getting some of the tax benefits of structuring for a family office, what really is, quote unquote, the proper size? That could be very debatable. I've said in the past 700 million plus, but I'm not so sure that it may not be simply deca of millions. But a little bit more on to your kind of specific question. And I guess I'm looking better since 2022 on the Bitcoin and some other plays. So I'm still active broadly in crypto and Web3. Bitcoin is my lead. I have Solana, and I'm intrigued by XRP. Those would probably be my big 3. It's a little boring. If you were to ask me that 4 to 5 years ago, it would have been way more enticing. I'm extremely active I kind of like to be liquid, because I don't know if I'm putting money with a manager, and I've been an LP before. I mean, I love supporting entrepreneurs in VC. I love the promise of VC. I love to go to Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, other areas where there's tremendous entrepreneurial spirit and the value of VC. But the math isn't showing so well now. Where are the IPOs happening? Where's the liquidity? What value am I getting investing in VC other than supporting an ecosystem, which is valuable? And I look at the math of, I'm getting what I call liquid VC-like returns in public markets. So AI, robotics is going to be so big. Like, you're all kind of missing out on this. Drones. Now, Jensen kind of killed a little bit of the hope in quantum computing, but I'm not so sure he's not doing a misdirect on that. So I'm still active in some areas there. And by the way, I enjoy also boring direct ownership of businesses. Among the common traits that I see when I travel the world with dynastic families is they do own and control, quote unquote, private companies, not necessarily ones they started. They may buy into, and they simply make them better. They have complete control, which is the whole advantage of a single family office: control, privacy, and customization. Nothing, everything else pales in comparison to a correct, the right single family office. Sorry, banks. Sorry, MFOs. You're good at heart, I'm sure, and maybe for most people doing a good job. You will never compare to a single family office because no one cares about that money like that family does. The challenge is, are they doing it right? And that's a different subject. So I'm probably overly allocated because I'm an aggressive investor. I'm okay with volatility. So I'm still active in some of the cryptos that I noted. I'm active in various public, but I also have some private holdings in AI and robotics. Some of them I got more directly, some of them through funds I'm active in, some of them through an SPV. But honestly, my liquid portfolio and staying liquid, including in the Mag 7, including in some plays on data centers and the infrastructure behind data centers. I'm not as active in real estate, although I am looking at ranch land. So ranch land and proper cattle management are things that I'm interested in and looking at. I'm a little concerned about being overly diversified. I am an advocate of how many best ideas could you have? I don't have 50 best ideas. I have, well, technically one, right? But I might have 3 to 5, and I want to have diversity. I don't want to take on company risks. Suppose something goes wrong with an Enron-like accounting issue that I wasn't familiar with. Suppose China invades Taiwan. So there's challenges and problems. There's certain risk that I'm willing to take. Oh, and by the way, I still enjoy gold. I want to own physical gold as well. And part of it, I want to keep out of the banking system in varying countries. What I will also say, going back to VC and PE, there's some incredibly talented people in the industry. And I think 5% of you as GPs are awesome. And families, especially larger scale families that don't want to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty, especially in private companies. But how else are you going to teach the rising generation unless you do that? So that's also why I'm an advocate of owning and controlling private companies, engaging the rising generation, seeing how the world really works, understanding negotiation, the fact that business owners will also lie to you, they'll fabricate things, understanding how to negotiate, banking, leverage. All that is a better teacher than any university or college from that perspective will ever be. But all that being said, there are some, I think it's 5%, and it's just me, where you might be better off in those incredible funds for a part of your portfolio being an LP. Good luck identifying them. They change, dynamics change in the industry with macroeconomics, with GP partners in your own scenario. And now you're adding on additional counterparty risk for someone like me who likes control, who likes a little more and more to be liquid and likes to have global optionality. I want to be more diverse. Now, I could get into, are we too dollar denominated? Should we have more diversity in varying currencies and business interests around the world? If you're a significant family, the short answer, David, I don't want to go on with this. The short answer is yes.
Brilliant, Angelo. Very interesting. Can we look at sort of sovereign risk and disaster planning? Lessons from the last few years, if you like. You've done extensive work advising families on sovereign risk and disaster preparation. What new insights have emerged given your expertise in this area?
Yeah, like I actually have some show notes from a family that I've done some work with. So I'm going to go back to some of the things that I also said earlier. A lot of us, and me, everyone, we have blind spots. Ultra wealthy families understand that things could go wrong. I mentioned earlier 1620s English Reformation, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, and other things. We have political bifurcation and grave challenges around the world. The U.S. is bifurcated. The U.S. has a massive deficit. Now, the world revolves around the dollar. That gives us a level, with me being here in the U.S., of power and authority. But things don't last forever. The risk and challenges that we're facing now from China comparative to the US and Russia is completely different than 30 or 40 years ago. China is a far more significant adversary. I mentioned things that I'm active in AI and robotics and drones. Well, let's look at that. The US may have a small edge on AI. We do not have an edge on robotics. We may have an edge on the intellectual research and development and talent. We don't have the production capacity that the Chinese have. And on drones, we're not even playing in the same ballpark. We're way behind. Now, might that change in the next 4 years? We have some very talented and smart people like Eric Schmidt and Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel have spoken about this. We have the talent and resources here in this country, let alone, Elon. We have it, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be able to execute depending on a variety of challenges in terms of that we have. So families around the world often, one, they understand some of the issues that I'm talking about more than American families that could be ignorant to it. Also, in practically every other country, you could get greater tax arbitrage, understanding where to set up structures, trust, and business, varying different from where you classify as residency and having tax arbitrage. In the US, our system, the IRS, that follows us everywhere. So anyone that is a US citizen or a green card holder, the onerous IRS is going to follow you anywhere around the world. So we don't have, in planning for sovereign risk, we don't get the tax arbitrage, but we still get the value, in my perspective, in terms of planning for that. So where do I look at as being interesting locations? And here's a key point that I will say. This can change. It changes with political regimes, with tax policy that they enact, with public sentiment in the country. So if I was international, I would still look at having some interest in the US. Areas like South Dakota, Wyoming, we don't report to the common reporting standard. So we actually are kind of quasi a safe haven or even a tax haven for those from around the world. Now, again, be careful about citizenship and green card unless that's what you want, because then everything is going to be taxed here within our US system. I'm still a huge advocate, and people call me old-fashioned, of Switzerland. So perhaps you get an EU passport, Malta, or in my case, being half Italian and my citizenship or my cultural heritage, perhaps in Italy, I get beautiful culture, great food, an amazing country, a little bureaucratic. Things are changing, but I'm also close to, quote unquote, Switzerland. Maybe I set up a second family office there. I set up structures. I negotiate via the tax cantons if I'm more active in a place like Switzerland. I know a lot of people, not great for taxes, but if you want to be isolated, New Zealand, Iceland could be areas that get you away from all the challenges happening around the world. I mentioned Italy before. And yes, I would be intrigued by the United Arab Emirates. My challenge with it being a kingdom, basically at the whim of the king or the heir that takes over, if he or she were to pass or he were to pass away, I don't know if I would have all my eggs in that basket. Singapore is close to China, but interesting. In Latin America, I'd probably look at Uruguay. And again, in your backyard in Europe, for certain structures of trust and taxes, you can't go wrong with Luxembourg. And sure, areas like Finland and parts of Scandinavia, very stable, good banking, lower on crime, except for aspects of Sweden. But I may not like the tax structure there. Do I do a digital nomad visa? Do I do a residency without tying into citizenship and taxes? Actually, I would, if I was a US citizen, shocking to some, me saying this, I would especially now look at Canada. Remote Western, quote unquote, Canada could also be areas that I would show some interest in. I would be careful about having my dollars denominated or dollars or capital or currency only in one country. Even though the dollar in the US is awesome, doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. I would look at the Norwegian krona, the Swiss franc, the Singapore dollar. I would look to own business and interest that would be offshore and would diversify my interest. I would own gold. I would own physical gold. Yes, I would keep some in the wonderful Swiss mountains as well. I would definitely own art. I could do a whole thing on art, but I don't want to, that's probably not going to be the core focus in terms of what we're doing today. I would absolutely have cash on hand. I would have Bitcoin, and not your keys, not your Bitcoin. No, owning it through an ETF does not give you sovereign protection. It all comes back to a single point of failure at a bank, at a custodian, at whatever, a platform for crypto, the single point of failure means, is it really mine in a time of crisis? Or depending on variety of liquidity, banks also go under. You could also be frozen by governments, as we saw happen and has happened around the world. So you need to have optionality. You need an onshore and an offshore plan. You need structures within trust and LLCs or other corporation entities intertwined with foundations. Now, that could be a 3-hour discussion on estate planning and global sovereignty from that perspective. I mentioned some countries like Luxembourg and others that are awesome from that perspective. And again, partially depending on US citizen or not. And if a US citizen, what state are you electing to be in? And how do you have freedom of movement and communication if something were to go wrong? But I do go back to what you deem to be liquidity. Oh, I got $1 billion in the bank. Well, if certain things were to happen, do you ever have access to that? So that's why I think that cash on hand. I do think that there's going to be, I was watching the John Wick movies. They have that sanctuary hotel where, in theory, nothing bad could go down if you go there. You know, I don't mean to make it a dystopian world, but are we going to have a community of future kind of quasi, what I would call from that perspective, like sanctuary cities? I don't know, is Abu Dhabi going to be the place to go? Is it going to be Helsinki? Is it going to be, you name it, Austin? I don't know, but I do know things are changing rapidly. I need to be aware that I don't want to lose what I built or access and my liquidity, and really what is the true definition of liquidity. So these are all things that gravely need to be considered. And as you can imagine, David, the vast majority of family offices are not addressing these issues.
Can we look at your family office channel on YouTube, Angelo? Tell us about it. Why did you launch it, and what are your goals with it?
I mean, I technically registered early in YouTube's days at Family Office. I was so fortunate. And I started to pick up the pace a little bit in 2017, and really more so the last 2 or 3 years, kind of a latter stage of COVID and coming out of it, I just became more active. So your team at Family Capital are amazing. I look so up to you and Mike and the team and the wonderful writing and talent and resources you bring, and help to educate me and help me to think differently. But I'm not natural at publishing and writing in the way that you are. I enjoy the camera. I enjoy the stage. I enjoy the imperfections of natural talk and conversation. So for me, it was simply a better platform. I looked at what's out there and even as I'm evolving what I do and what others, quote unquote, are doing in the family office world. And I mean, I guess this never makes me a popular person in the community for a variety of reasons. I speak my mind. I tell it like how I think it is. And I absolutely admit when I'm wrong, which is a fair amount. But this goes back to my issue of, I think the industry is very bland, very vanilla, never rocks the boat, never looks to challenge ideas. You have to, I'm going to put it this way. It's rare to find people who are willing to change their minds on topics that effectively they refuse to investigate. There's still families that are ignorant relative to Bitcoin, relative to AI, relative to things that are changing. They get caught in their ego and past successes, and henceforth it makes it hard for them to admit when they're wrong, and when you cut your losses and you move forward, that is the right thing to do. So I enjoy having these open and honest conversations on something like at Family Office, or my alternative at Family Office TV on YouTube, on what I do on X or LinkedIn. So it is important to reach an audience, to be active on social media, to help educate broadly from a public perspective and be of value to those in the community. Now, do I have a lot of followers? No. I mean, maybe by Family Office standards, but I'm as far away as you could get from being an influencer, and really have no desire for that. Yes, I do a lot of 3-hour interviews. I'm known, someone said Angelo's the Joe Rogan. That was way too complimentary to me. But like Joe Rogan, in terms of being long form in the family office world, I could think of people like Jason Mon, Carol Pepper, and others that were guests last year, that we just didn't stop for 3+ hours. In terms of what put me on the map a little bit, I think it was 3 years ago, I interviewed Michael Saylor, and I asked him some very biting questions that he didn't like. Some of it was picked up on Fox News and other platforms, and that gave me a fair number of followers. I've interviewed Tony Robbins, Jeremy Grantham, the iconic hedge fund manager, and bringing it a little bit more recent in the last 30 days. I learned so much from my long form interviews with Jordy Vischer. That's Visser. The man is brilliant, retired hedge fund manager, and now he's active in the world of Bitcoin and AI and technology. And honestly, he's probably more articulate in clarifying his message, at least from an investing perspective, maybe not as much in the family office world. That's going to be more my wheelhouse. And I took notes. I watched it again myself. I followed up. I've made money in certain other allocations and investments that I made in that. And just this week, boy, talk about being fresh, David. I interviewed PhD, so Dr. Ian Cook, and we talked about, he worked in the family office, not anymore. He's a PhD in machine learning, a burgeoning AI expert. And we spoke about how family offices need to not just integrate AI into what they're doing for all the reasons that I noted earlier, but like I said, own it, don't rent it, take control of that process. So I enjoy learning myself on the platform, and hopefully some others are able to walk away with 1 or 2 good ideas a year and get value from it.
Brilliant. And how do you think YouTube and digital media in general is playing a role to shape the next generation of family office leaders?
Well, the key word there is next generation or rising generation. So that goes back to the question of how do younger people, we may define that differently. Is that under 30, under 25, Generation Z? Is that teenagers? It could be all the above. How do they learn and absorb information? And I'm a big believer in being a critical thinker, of thinking outside. It's overstated, but outside the box. I'm not afraid to take risk, to see around corners. And I think family offices would benefit even from really thinking for themselves. What you learned and how the world works is just flat out different now than it might have been in the past. And you need to be open and listen to my interviews with the incredible Adam Robinson. I mean, the man is brilliant. And now, an American who's now in the UK and going to the Middle East a lot. And some of our we did some 3-hour ones as well over the years. So I've really enjoyed that. So, David, when you ask those people, especially if they're under 25, are they watching the traditional news platforms? Are they reading the traditional platforms of even Financial Times or Wall Street Journal? Now, of course, some of them are. The reality is, and Van Jones said this, the liberal commentator on, I think it's MSNBC, Van Jones stated to his 15-year-old son, how are you getting information, son? I'm sure you're listening to Oprah Winfrey, Obama, and he mentioned some others. And his son laughed and said, no, I'm listening to Sketch and Kai Cenat, and I'm on Rumble, and I'm on Twitch. And how the younger people absorb and obtain information is different than how we might have done it back in our day. I'm not here to argue right or wrong. I'm just here to argue they're absorbing information differently. So understanding social media and those platforms is going to be valuable, including TikTok, which I'm not that fluid in, but I should be. And that's my bad. And I got to get better at it. Maybe that'll be one of my tasks this year, now that for now it's allowed here in the US. So I do think all these mediums are changing the dynamics. We all have to be lifelong learners, and we have to be very careful not to be careful with our biases or confirmation bias, and keep an open mind.
Can we look at your SFO continuity, a new model for private membership? What is SFO continuity, and how does it serve members differently than traditional family office organizations?
Sure. So some people in the family office world would know me as being the founder and longtime CEO of Family Office Association. It was a labor of love for what felt like, 2 decades. It brought me into the industry and I learned so much. And by the way, always a shout out. I had incredible people around me that allowed any successes the organization had. Joe Riley was an incredible president, and I was so fortunate to have him in that founding role. Ryan Anson was incredible. So built upon the shoulders of others, I decided to sell Family Office Association midway, I guess you could say, during COVID. I wouldn't say I retired. I would say I took a little time off. I elected to focus on some of my investments and portfolio and my family, and put to work some of the things I've learned over 20 years, which was incredibly unique and valuable. And I really enjoyed it. And yes, I have the stage, I guess you could say, at my podcast, which is on Apple and Spotify. I don't post as much there. I'm more active on @FamilyOffice, as we just spoke about. And that's been a lot of fun. But I really did miss being more of a pundit in terms of my thinking and thoughts and the work that I do. So I set up SFO Continuity. SFO obviously stands for Single Family Office, dedicated to an intimate group of families that get my proprietary content in writing, and some of the writing that I do, or transcripts, and a lot of the private interviews and videos, connecting the dots access. I really want to be available to them 24/7, and think that I bring a unique, I guess you could say, perspective in terms of thinking. And again, as I say, the most family offices and families are built for a world that's already gone. They're built pre-AI. Everything is changing. And I don't mean to be a bit of a doomsdayer. I'm just facing up to reality. There's also, more so in the next 10 years, going to be incredible opportunities. And now is the time to be wickedly successful, to make a lot of money, because I do think we're going to be heading into what could be trying times with the advent, inevitably, of AGI into superintelligence. And we're going to have a certain number of trillionaires, governments, and institutions. I'm not going to say they're going to run the world, but it's going to be harder to create, especially looking perhaps 10 years out. So now is an interesting time. So for me to get together digitally, the work I do in writing, and I'm doing more and more in-person programs. Maybe we'll talk about my Palm Beach Forum upcoming. So my members are incredible. David, I could think of a couple of them. One of them was a co-founder of the Harvard Endowment back in 1974. Yes, he's an older gentleman, sharp as a tack, and has invested in over 900 private companies. And others, an amazing tech entrepreneur that had 3 incredible exits. Another was a founding father of kind of the fund of funds and hedge fund community. Others I could think of were, I could think of one person that had like a 300x return on a 7-figure investment relatively recently. So there's amazing peers, and that's where the value is. The problem with a lot of the membership and events community, and we hinted at it earlier, they're full of a lot of people that are fake family offices and a lot of sponsors. I want to have an intimate group of families as peers, including myself as an allocator and investor, and talk about important subjects that are going to be in my wheelhouse of strength. And also what I talk about at Family Office: geopolitics, economics, and investing, and bringing that always in to the world of wealth and single family offices, and then tying it into the new nuances and how things are changing relative to AI. So for me, it's been a labor of love. I don't want it to have the bureaucracy that I built up and the mistakes I made at Family Office Association. I'm imperfect. I make mistakes every day, but I love what I do. If I would tell younger people maybe anything, I'm obsessed. There's going to be people that are taller than me, more talented, you name it. Maybe I'm very mediocre in so many ways, but I am wickedly obsessed with the world, and have been for decades, of the single family office. I throw my life into it. I want to learn about it hours and hours every day, talk to amazing people, and share my insight, especially to those who believe and supported me. that are supporters of my SFO continuity. Some people just go to my AngeloRobles.com. So my website's pretty simple. It's just my name. And it's very obvious in terms of, I think, the value that the organization provides and the opportunity for the right families and or single family office executives to join. David, I think we're heading into, like I've been talking about the whole time, very, very interesting times. I can't guarantee you if it's going to be a utopia or dystopia. I could make the argument that with the rise of AGI and superintelligence, that a lot of things like fusion energy is solved, energy becomes free. That changes the dynamic of everything, the world and wars, to the cost of living. It's going to be up to us as humans, and we can't all put it on the burden of what, upcoming trillionaires and governments. We, the people, have to make a decision to make a positive impact. You need to have an incredible mindset. I want to succeed. I think Eric Thomas, who's a consultant to athletes, I believe, said this. You want to succeed as badly as you want to breathe, because it's going to get very hard. It's hard out there. And that opportunity and that passion, I hope I bring to SFO continuity, my work with families, and more, the rising generations that get the things I'm talking about on AI, on blockchain, on Bitcoin, on the risk around the world and new information and how they're learning. So to me, it's a very, very exciting time.
Can we just talk about the Palm Beach forum, for single family offices, Angelo? That's going to be held in the spring of 2025 this year. What sets it apart?
Sure. So for my members at SFO Continuity, over the last year or so, I've done probably 20 intimate programs in person. I've done so many digital, I can't even count, and writing. But I breakfast, lunches, soirees, gatherings, peer-to-peer. But I do miss the larger stage. So I look forward this year to hopefully this one, but maybe more, maybe Dallas, LA, maybe London, maybe Switzerland, maybe United Arab Emirates, who knows? A little bit of something of a little bit more scale, taking me back to the days when I was on stage or interviewed or introduced incredible people like Ray Dalio and Tony Robbins and Sam Zell and Peter Thiel. And I've been so fortunate at my programs over the years to, again, build upon the shoulders of giants and to learn from them. It's been a great honor. So I'm very much looking forward. No, it's a little off the grid of my website at angelorobles.com right now. That may change as we get a little closer. But for first and foremost, my members of SFO Continuity, they get early access, preferred access, and other opportunities during that whole week that others don't get. So I look to make it a week-long extravaganza, beginning the week of March 23rd. It's a Monday. I'm going to be there for the full 7 days. And I look to get together with amazing families and thought leaders and have incredible discussions, David, about the things that we're talking about right now, about investing, about geopolitical issues, about sovereign risk, about liquidity, about AI. Not just myself, but bringing in, I mentioned Jordy Fisher before, incredible people and speakers that you get to interact with, not just while they speak and walk off stage, but smoking a cigar in the evening, a drink at cocktails, dinners over multiple days. So we're hosting it in Palm Beach. Most of it's going to be at the beautiful Colony Hotel, but we're going to have breakouts and lunches and dinners and all over the Brazilian court, the breakers and all that. Probably a little yacht trip that we're going to do and have a discussion on. So for me, being an active allocator and investor, some of the program that we built up and some of the work that we're doing, and imagine going around the room, David, because so we're going to have less and less traditional presenters. This is going around the room to peers. Joe, you run the family office for XYZ and you're a wealth creator and you're an inheritor. What are the last 3 investments that you made? Why and how much did you put in? Jim, what's the biggest mistake you made in being an entrepreneur? Joe, what would you tell your younger self as an inheritor relative that you wish you knew 10 or 20 years ago? Imagine going back in time and having 5 minutes with your college self. What would you tell yourself? We get very deep, very personal. And because we don't have a lot of sponsors and don't want a lot, just very, very few, we're allowed to do programming that is peer-to-peer, that is real, that is, foundational and really emotional sometimes too, in terms of some of the things we talk about. So I've been active in Palm Beach for a number of years. Yeah, it's getting more attention now because it's kind of the White House destination, kind of ancillary, although maybe a little more than that. So it is an interesting time. There's so much going on around the world that getting incredible families that may have a level of influence together, and not just for a day or two, but for longer and longer, is important. So those that may be a family or a single family office could reach out to me, at Angelo@angelorobles.com and learn more. And perhaps those that are unique thought leaders, there may be a little bit more capacity in terms of things that we could do to accommodate. But don't get me wrong. My focus is on single family offices, the family and the SFO, but I always want to meet incredible people. And yes, there are some that are out there as attorneys, accounting, GPs, governance experts, technology experts. I want to learn, teach me, educate me. So the opportunity of meeting incredible people and being mutually beneficial to a variety of people is something that it's going to be very, very important to me. Maybe in concluding a little bit of that, David, and this is going to be one of the anchor tenements that we're also going to talk about among the things that we just spoke about today. The family office of the near future, like probably this year, the near future is just fundamentally different. Family offices won't be a scaled down version. Oh, but Angelo said less people. It's just a scaled down version of today's model. It's going to be a completely different, quote unquote, entity. I said earlier, it's going to be faster, leaner, and simply better, and going to be more and more driven, which is just the realities of the world, by AI that don't rely on human people and don't work 9 to 5. And in theory, kind of run 24/7. Traditional family offices will not be able to compete. They won't be able to compete in this new world. They may stay status quo. The family may still end up being rich. They're not going to be as rich or as influential or as valuable moving forward as they could have been if they decided to make some of the creative way of thinking and adaptations within the family office, leveraging AI and understanding some of the challenges from a geopolitical, a sovereign risk, and liquidity that are going on there now, David.
Excellent, Angelo. Should we move to sort of wrapping up this discussion by getting your final thoughts on the whole family office world? What do you think are the main takeaways from this conversation? What would they be, Angelo?
Well, I think I probably pounded it home pretty hard. I get a little frustrated when I hear people say that information is not valuable, that there's too much of it out there. Now, that's true. And the reality is 90% of the people are not adding any value to you. They may not be purposely trying to get you off track, although some of them are. So only 10% of people are really going to be valuable to your strive for excellence. I'm really, really big at not settling for status quo, not being okay. Be damn incredible. If you're not going to build a single family office or maintain one for it to be just wickedly incredible and pay your people properly, we could save compensation for another time. I think family office executives that are incredible deserve to be paid incredibly. But what I'm talking about is only a small percentage of people, really, it's like 10%, add any value whatsoever. So I think it's going to be important to realize the advent of all the things I've been talking about: sovereign risk, liquidity, investments moving forward. Do you know what robotics is going to do? How many robots are going to be on this earth within 10 years? Like, it may rival people. Drones may literally be tens of billions, and you're missing out. You're missing out not just on the investing opportunity because you're being too slow, and not understanding it, you're missing out on the fundamental changes and how it's going to just radically change everything. Like I said, the single family office of the future, really the near future, it's not just a smaller version or watered down of an existing model. So I'll go back, and I've always been an extreme advocate of the single family office, and also answering your question. The single family office, like I said earlier, is the ultimate. It is the absolute pinnacle and ultimate. It doesn't answer to quarterly reports. It is the ultimate in privacy control and customization when done right, which is not often enough. No one cares about your money like you do. And yeah, 7 or 8 years ago, when I said whatever, half a billion, 700 million, well, either I was wrong, which happens, or I changed my mind. It's different now. So I do think, although I'm not always a big fan of the verbiage of a virtual family office, and there are certain times I feel where virtual and being remote is baloney, and don't buy into it, but there are realities of the advent of technologies and AI and the things that I've been talking about today, where maybe even at that level, and some of the tax benefits you would get here in the US of structuring properly a family office could make sense for effectively a much smaller, quote unquote, family. So there's never been a better time to have a single family office. For those of you that service the community, to provide value to that family and the single family office. I'm just frustrated that I want family offices to be held to the highest standard, to be just incredible. And I feel that too many of them, again, settle for comfort. And this world is changing, and I'm waking them up and hopefully giving them value and resources through my membership, through the consulting work that I do with families. And it's really motivating me to have traveled the world much in the last year, Mexico, multiple LATAM, US, Canada, Europe. There's some incredible people out there. It's so invigorating and exciting to meet these incredible entrepreneurs, families, rising generations, and even people that service the community, to learn from them, to share some of my knowledge and collaborate together. So there has never been a better time to be in this community, and I'm really enjoying it, David.
Brilliant, Angelo. Well, look, there's some really fascinating insights into the family office world, some of the issues, well, a lot of the issues they face, and I think they've been certainly well informed in that respect. Well, thank you so much, Angelo, for all your insights. It's been great.
David, as I mentioned, certainly Family Capital is a wonderful organization. Thank you for your great work in the community and all that I learned from it. Again, I'm standing on top of the shoulders of giants in the community. It's been a great honor and a pleasure. There's incredible people out there. Take the effort to learn, but at the end of the day, always think for yourself. David, thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. Brilliant.